Imagine a bank, right? They suddenly dispatch this whole team of technicians to tinker with the heavy steel locks on their main vault. And publicly, they claim they just wanted to make the door handle, a bit more usable.
Yeah, right. Nobody is buying that.
Exactly. You wouldn't buy it for a single second. You'd immediately know they were quietly trying to cover up a massive security flaw before anyone else found it. And well, that is exactly the scenario PlayStation just tried to pull off with firmware update 13.60.
It really is the ultimate corporate poker face. I mean, they push an update out to millions of consoles worldwide with patch notes so incredibly vague they might as well be blank.
Oh, totally.
And then they just sit back and watch the entire security research community hold its collective breath.
And for a minute there, the community was in a state of genuine panic. I mean, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. You're probably joining us because you know this ecosystem moves at absolute lightning speed.
It really does. I mean, fortunes, at least in terms of homebrew prestige, are made and lost on a single line of code in these firmware patches.
Yeah, so our mission today is to tear through this massive stack of recent updates from the PlayStation reverse engineering scene. We're going to unpack that whole firmware panic, break down a brand new browser exploit, and look at the tools turning your PS5 into a full-blown Linux desktop.
Plus, we've got to cover the, frankly, staggering progress of PC emulators trying to run PS5 games right now.
Yes, definitely getting to that, because for anyone trying to keep up, this scene can feel like drinking from a fire hose. It's just constant technical jargon, GitHub repos, Discord leaks.
Yeah, but when you step back and connect the dots between all these different projects, you see this fascinating arms race. It's a constant tug of war between a manufacturer trying to lock down the hardware and a really dedicated community mapping out every hidden tunnel underneath it.
So let's start with the manufacturer's defenses. Specifically, this 13.36 firmware update. Sony claimed, quote, messages and usability have been improved on some screens.
Right, which is just classic misdirection.
Exactly. And the immediate fear tearing through the forums was that this patch had basically poured concrete into the main tunnel everyone was hoping to use. I'm talking about researcher Gezine's highly prized, unreleased, zero-day kernel exploit.
Yeah, and to understand why that caused such a panic, you have to look at the economy of exploits. A zero-day kernel vulnerability is like the absolute holy grail of system hacking.
Because the kernel is the brain, right?
Exactly. It dictates what the hardware is actually allowed to do. So if you compromise the kernel, you gain the highest possible level of privilege. The community knew Gezine was sitting on one of these vulnerabilities.
And they knew it was basically their best shot at a future widespread jailbreak.
Right. So when rumors hit that 13.60 patched it, it literally felt like the window for future homebrew had just slammed shut.
But then the smoke cleared, and Gezine actually had to step in publicly to clarify what was going on. It turns out firmware 13.60 did patch a vulnerability they were actively writing a report on, but
it was an entirely different bug.
Yes. The primary zero-day kernel exploit is actually still alive and remains unpatched on 13.60. But, I mean, I'm just trying to picture how a researcher even manages that, sitting on a massive zero-day while simultaneously feeding the manufacturer smaller bugs to fix.
It requires a very calculated tightrope walk, Security researchers often discover multiple flaws while they're mapping out a system's architecture.
Oh, so they just have a bunch of them lined up.
Pretty much. And they might choose to disclose a lower impact bug through Sony's official bounty program that allows them to get paid, and build a professional reputation with the company.
While keeping the big one in their back pocket.
Exactly. Meanwhile, they keep the critical zero-day private, reserving it for the homebrew community to eventually weaponize into a jailbreak. So by patching the smaller reported bugs, Sony inadvertently caused this massive false alarm.
Which perfectly illustrates the golden rule of the homebrew scene, really. If you care about this stuff, stay on the lowest firmware possible. You never actually know what invisible changes they're making under the hood.
Right. They could quietly patch your only way in without ever mentioning it in the release notes. And, the gap between a firmware release and a public jailbreak is often measured in months, sometimes years.
Because the developers need time to make it safe for average users, right?
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, though, even on this new 13.60 firmware, the community is already proving they aren't completely locked out.
Wait, really?
Yeah, we've seen verifiable images of the Kstuff tool, specifically the KTO Lite version 1.09, already running on a retail PS5 that was updated to 13.60.
But wait, if the zero day isn't public yet, how are they running custom tools on the absolute latest firmware?
Well, it points to researchers having private, undisclosed entry points that somehow survived the system update. KStuff itself is a vital foundational tool. It essentially patches the system memory on the fly to bypass Sony signature checks.
allowing unsigned code to run.
Exactly. So seeing it function on 13.60 confirms that the mechanisms for reverse engineering haven't been broken, even if the general public doesn't have the keys yet.
You mentioned entry points, and that is actually the perfect bridge to our next topic, because having a kernel exploit like Gezine 0 Day is incredible. But sitting alone, it's basically a locked vault inside another locked vault.
Right, you have to get into the building first.
Exactly, you need a userland exploit just to reach the kernel.
And historically, the web browser has been the most reliable front door for that. I mean, it's a massive, complex piece of software that has to interact with untrusted code from the internet.
Which provides a huge attack surface.
Yeah, researchers can just poke and prod at it endlessly.
Which brings us to the new WebKit bug dropped by researchers Nathan Fargo and UFM42. They discovered a type confusion bug using a CSS font face use after free vulnerability. And I really want to make sure we unpack the mechanics of this rather than just throwing the acronym around.
Good call.
Because a use after free, or UAF, is basically when a program clears a spot in active memory but fails to delete the map pointing to that spot, right?
Let's look at it from the perspective of the browser's DOM engine, the document object model. This is the underlying system that structures everything you see on a web page.
Okay, so how does it mess up?
Well, the engine might create an object in memory, let's say a validation message, to handle some specific text. Later, the user closes the prompt, and the engine decides it doesn't need that message anymore, so it frees up the memory space.
But the critical flaw is that the pointer is still out there.
Yes, a pointer, a specific reference to that exact memory address, still exists somewhere else in the code.
So the system thinks the plot of land is empty and ready for a new house to be built, but someone else still has the old address programmed into their GPS.
That's a great analogy.
But how does an attacker actually weaponize that mistake?
Through a process called shaping the heap. The heap is just the pool of memory the system uses for dynamic allocation. To exploit the UAF, the attacker writes a malicious script that floods the heap with thousands of tiny, carefully crafted fake objects.
Oh, so they're basically just spraying the memory.
Exactly. They are spraying the memory, just hoping one of their malicious objects lands precisely on that recently freed plot of land. So when the browser eventually uses that lingering pointer, it expects to find a harmless text message.
But instead, it executes the attacker's code.
Bingo.
Man, that sounds incredibly delicate. You're basically forcing a highly complex machine to make a very specific mistake at a microscopic level.
It requires absolute pixel-perfect precision. That's why developing these exploits takes so much time and testing. But when it works, as Fargo and UFM42 demonstrated, it grants the holy grail of userland access.
Which is arbitrary read-write, or ARW, meaning they can read and alter the memory of the browser process whenever they want.
Right. They've successfully picked the lock on the front door.
And our sources show this specific WebKit bug impacts PS4s from firmware 6.0 up to 1150 and PS5s from 1.0 up to 8.60. We've even seen a live demo of it executing on a real PS4 running firmware 11.2.
Yeah, that demo is pretty exciting to see.
But, you know, if I'm listening to this and I look at my PS5 sitting on firmware 8.00, I probably shouldn't be celebrating an instant jailbreak just yet, right? Because there is a massive structural roadblock in the PS5's architecture.
Yes, there is. The PS5 employs ASLR address space layout randomization. It's a standard security feature on modern devices, but Sony implemented it really rigorously on the PS5.
How does that actually block the exploit?
Imagine a massive corporate filing cabinet. Every single time you reboot the console, the operating system randomly shuffles which folders go into which drawers.
Oh, wow. So even if I have a map pointing to the exact folder I need to exploit, the map is completely useless because the folder's been moved.
Exactly. The WebKit bug gives you the ability to read and write, but because of ASLR, you are effectively blindfolded. You don't know where in the memory map to write your malicious code.
So how do they take the blindfold off?
Researchers have to find a completely separate vulnerability known as a leak bug. This is a flaw that accidentally reveals a memory address. Once you have one fixed reference point, you can calculate the mathematical offsets.
And then figure out where the system shuffled everything else. It's like finding a single labeled folder in that massive cabinet and using it to deduce the sorting system for the whole thing.
That's exactly it. But until that leak bug is found specifically for the PS5, this WebKit exploit is a vital first step, but it's basically stalled in the foyer. You can't reach the kernel if you can't see the layout of the building.
Right, and that search for the leak bug is exactly what the top minds in the scene are working on right now. But let's fast forward conceptually for a second. Let's assume you are on a vulnerable console, the ASLR is defeated, and you trigger the kernel exploit.
Okay, so you blow the vault door wide open.
Right. But standing in the vault doesn't mean much if you can't easily carry the gold out. And this is where the actual user experience is changing completely right now. Console modding used to be this terrifying process of staring at black screens and typing hacky terminal commands.
Oh yeah, constantly anxious that a typo would permanently brick your machine.
Exactly. But the maturation of the tooling is arguably as important as the exploits themselves. The ecosystem is rapidly moving away from raw, brittle scripts and into highly polished, almost commercial-grade software.
Yeah, the standout example in our sources is the PS5 Payload Manager hitting version GORT 0.5.0.
And for the uninitiated, once you exploit the console, you send it a payload, which is just a packet of custom code for it to execute. It could be an FTP server or a tool to dump a game disk to your hard drive.
Or a cheat engine. But managing those payloads used to be an absolute headache of juggling USB drives and typing in local network IP addresses. Now the Payload Manager runs a clean interface directly on the console itself.
Which is huge. And the newest update introduces an in-memory session history.
Yeah, it actually tracks and logs every single payload you've launched during your current session. If you're a developer trying to debug why a specific chain of code crashed the system, having that granular history log is invaluable.
And the update mechanism itself is brilliant. It updates directly within the app over Wi-Fi. You don't have to unplug a USB, plug it into your PC, drag files over and plug it back in. It just feels remarkably like an App Store experience.
It really does. And then you pair that with new cross-platform tools like the Universal Payload Sender. It's a graphical interface for Windows, Mac, and Linux that lets you shoot these payloads over your home network with a single click.
Plus there's SaveSync PSPC, which is a bridge app that decrypts and moves game saves between your PC and the PS5 seamlessly.
Lowering the barrier to entry like this changes the entire demographic of the development scene. When you don't need a computer science degree just to safely test a payload, you invite thousands of average users to experiment.
And that crowdsourced testing finds bugs faster, generates massive amounts of crash data, and just exponentially accelerates the development of more complex software.
Yeah, and it really doesn't get more complex than what they were doing with Linux.
Oh man, the Linux stuff is wild. There's a PS5 Linux Loader soft mod that essentially strips away the gaming interface and turns the PS5 into a highly capable desktop PC.
And we aren't just talking about a proof of concept command line here. People often forget that the hardware inside the PS5 is essentially a custom AMD PC motherboard.
Right, you've got an 8-core, 16-thread CPU running at 3.5 gigahertz, paired with a very capable GPU.
Yeah, clocking in at 2.23 gigahertz. Now, normally the PlayStation operating system utilizes a hypervisor, which is a piece of software that tightly regulates and restricts how that hardware is used.
But the Linux loader bypasses that hypervisor completely.
Exactly. It bypasses it, granting unrestricted access to the raw compute power. The loader project on GitHub details how it interfaces directly with the hardware.
It's supporting 4K 60Hz video output natively. And it can even use the internal M.2 SSD slot as a dedicated Linux partition, so you aren't bottlenecked by slow USB drive speeds.
They're loading drivers for Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Ethernet. They've even built a browser-based dashboard running on port 8090 where you can manage your boot settings and transfer FTP files directly from a slick web interface.
It is basically a total hardware takeover. Users are booting into standard desktop environments like Ubuntu, running productivity software suites, and even playing PC games through Steam.
All utilizing the unrestricted power of the PS5 motherboard. It completely reframes what the device is actually capable of.
Which brings us to a perfect mirror image of this scenario. If the homebrew scene is focused on turning the PS5 into a standard PC, another massive group of developers is trying to turn standard PCs into PS5s.
The emulation frontier.
Yes, the emulation frontier. And the velocity of this specific area is breaking all historical norms.
Usually, modern console emulation takes a decade or more to become remotely viable. I mean, the PS3 architecture, with its custom cell processor, was a notorious nightmare to emulate.
Oh, total nightmare.
Yet, with the PS5, we are already seeing two experimental emulators, Kyty PS5 and SharpEmu, making massive, tangible strides.
I do need to push back on this a bit, though, because I always hear this debate. Physical PS5 consoles are incredibly accessible right now. You can walk into any big box store and buy one off the shelf. So why are developers dedicating thousands of unpaid hours to the Herculean effort of emulating it on a PC today?
Well, if you look at it strictly through the lens of just wanting to play a game today, it might seem redundant. But the emulation community operates on a completely different philosophy. The primary driver is actually preservation.
Right, because the industry is aggressively pushing toward a digital-only future.
Exactly. Digital licenses expire, authentication servers get shut down, and digital storefronts are closed permanently. Emulation ensures that the software logic and the gaming history aren't permanently lost when the physical hardware inevitably degrades.
Or when the corporate servers just go dark. It's like an insurance policy against the death of physical media. They're building a digital ark.
That's a great way to put it. But beyond preservation, there is the sheer engineering challenge. For these developers, reverse engineering a complex, completely undocumented operating system is the ultimate intellectual marathon.
They want to understand the machine at a microscopic level.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how Kyty PS5 and SharpEmu are running entirely different races to get to the same finish line.
Yeah, I was looking at the difference in their approaches. Kyty PS5 is making what I'd call a brute force compatibility push. They're using high-level emulation, or HLE, to basically intercept the game's requests and translate them quickly.
Right, skipping over a lot of the complex system checks just to get something on the screen.
And that brute force is actually yielding visible results. The project is already running 3D commercial games. Tom's Hardware did a breakdown, showing the 2020 remake of 13 booting and running it up to 30 frames per second.
Which is wild to see on video. Granted, it looks like a glitchy mess, broken textures, lighting issues all over the place, but it's actually accepting real-time player input.
They also got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Wrath of the Mutants hitting around 24 frames per second. For an emulator of a current generation console, getting any 3D retail game to render at all is a massive milestone.
It really is, but that high-level translation approach is exactly why you see those severe graphical glitches and crashes. You are taking shortcuts to get visual output.
Which brings us to the second project, SharpEmu.
Right, SharpEmu is so critical to the ecosystem because they represent the accuracy push using low-level emulation or LLE.
They recently pushed out version 0.0.3 release.2, and their GitHub repo explicitly warns users not to expect games to play right now. They are laser-focused on the foundational infrastructure.
Yeah, they're doing the grueling work of accurately mapping native CPU instructions and reverse engineering the exact bit-for-bit behavior of kernel functions. Instead of hacking together a quick visual output, they're translating the PS5's proprietary graphics calls into Vulkan and Molten VK.
And for you listening, if you aren't deep into graphics rendering, Vulkan and Molten VK are cross-platform graphics APIs. They are basically incredibly complex translators that take the highly specific visual commands the PS5 game is trying to send and rewrite them so a standard PC graphics card can understand them.
Precisely. And doing that translation accurately in real time is computationally expensive and really difficult to program. But Kyty's visible progress generates the hype and draws fresh developer talent into the scene, proving it can be done.
While SharpEmu is laying down the meticulous, accurate bedrock that will eventually allow emulation to be stable and bug-free years from now.
They're even studying the architecture of established PS4 emulators to better understand the lineage of Sony's code.
It's just a completely vibrant, relentlessly fast-moving ecosystem. Let's recap what we've unpacked today. We started with the panic over firmware 13.60, only to discover that the most critical zero-day kernel exploits are still hiding safely in the shadows, waiting for the right moment.
Yep. And we mapped out how a use-after-free WebKit bug allows researchers to breach the front door by manipulating the browser's memory heap, even if ASLR demands more puzzle pieces to navigate the PS5's randomized layout.
We also saw how the user experience is dramatically maturing, moving from fragile command scripts to seamless auto-updating interfaces with tools like the Payload manager.
And finally, the dual realities of hardware manipulation. Soft mods bypassing the hypervisor to unleash the PS5's raw power as a Linux desktop, while emulators perform the miraculous math required to run PS5 games natively on a PC.
Which leaves me with a lingering thought. When you can strip away the gaming interface to reveal a high-end Linux computer underneath, and when you can build a piece of software that flawlessly mimics the physical console on a standard Windows machine, the hardware itself becomes completely abstracted.
It really does. It blurs the lines completely.
A game console is increasingly just a standard PC trapped in a stylized plastic box. And it forces a deeper question for you listening. If you purchase that hardware and it sits in your living room, who truly holds the authority to dictate what operating system it runs?
Is it the manufacturer who originally built the vault or the person who bought it?
Exactly. The manufacturer can keep polishing the brass in the front door, but as we've seen today, the community will never stop mapping out the secret tunnels underneath. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning how your devices work, keep exploring the boundaries of your tech, and we will catch you on the next one.